Hi everyone, Bob here. As you can see, I am trying something a little bit new. I have a new camera angle. Hopefully it'll work. We'll see how it goes. So today I'm going to be building a sword. So it's one of the builds that I've been wanting to get round to for quite a while. I'll probably mention it in a couple of my other videos that, hey, I'll do a sword. It's probably one of the areas I'm not the best at, so probably that's why I've been putting it off. So yeah, here we go. So the first thing to do is to cut your core to length. So I've got a piece of 8mm core here, and that's been cut to 39 inches. So 42 is the maximum size you can have in Empire. But obviously you want to cut your core slightly shorter than that, because you've got to leave room for a safe tip on each end, and also room for the foam to go around that to make sure it's safe. So about 39 inches gives you around about the best sort of core size to be able to do that. So I'm going to go and tip this piece up. I don't know whether I'm actually going to film that, because you've seen it all before, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah, hope you enjoy, and here we go. So just giving a coat of glue onto the Kevlar, and then we just need to make sure that we rough up the core at both ends with a bit of sandpaper, to make sure that the glue sticks. I'm actually going to put some gloves on for doing this, because I find that once you start roughing up the core, you get glass fibres shedding off, and it then sticks in your hands, and that's nasty. So yeah, I would advise wearing gloves. So I'm just going to give the core, rough up the whole core. These cores come in really smooth, which is fantastic, but actually you don't want that. What you want is a rough surface, so the glue will stick to the core. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue on either end of the core. So this is just contact adhesive. I've gone into glues before on other videos, but yeah, so I just want a bit of layer of glue on either end. And the key with contact adhesives, I'm sure I've mentioned before, is to leave it until it's almost dry, so that it's tacky, which will give you a good adhesion to the foams, and of course the Larp. I'm just going to rest that there for the time being. Right, so I'm just going to cut a couple of little bits of offcut foam. I can get my knife to work, of course. And these are going to be the tips. I mean, I'm cutting it by eye, because I've done this a lot. However, you might want to just measure them out. So I find about 1 inch long ish is perfect. Depends on the size of your core and the weapon, I guess, but yeah, about 1 inch. And obviously this square, so I just cut the corners off, which gives them sort of hexagonal shape. It just makes them easy to wrap. Don't have to do that, it's not necessary. I just do. And again, apologise for the sound quality, but it is raining really heavily outside, and my shed has a tin roof, so yeah, that's what that's all about. Okay, so just gonna put some glue on these tips. And also, I apologise if my trying to cut these a bit shorter. If my head appears in shot, that's my speaker going to sleep. If the top of my head appears in shot, I do apologise. It's not a pretty sight. Ow. I've just realised I've got a cut on my finger and I've just covered it in glue. That's quite painful. Don't do that. Right, so I just need to leave those to dry for a sec. Even though it's raining outside, it's the middle of June, so it's still quite warm. You just need to make sure you do leave your glue to dry long enough so that it becomes tacky. You can use a hairdryer. I've got one actually, so just to speed things up slightly, make sure I've got the right cable. See, what you don't want to do is blow your stuff everywhere. Right, okay, so I've noticed that I haven't cut the Kevlar before. I haven't cut the Kevlar before I glued it. So here is a top tip. As in my other videos you might have seen, I cut the Kevlar out and I glue it. Actually, Kevlar, once it's glued, cuts much easier than before you glue it. So something I found out. So yeah, if you can glue it first, then cut it, makes the cutting of the Kevlar a lot easier. Trying to cut Kevlar with a pair of scissors is almost impossible, which is sort of the point of Kevlar. It stops the tip of the core poking through the foam, and by attaching a small piece of foam to the top of the core, it means that even if it does somehow work its way through the end of the foam, you've got a little bit of foam stuck to the end of the tip, which would help prevent some sort of injury. Right, let's cut this piece of Kevlar off and see what we can do. And again, I'm just doing this by eye, because I've done it a lot of times before. Again, if you want to measure, by all means do so. You want, if you've got an inch worth of tip, then you probably want just over an inch worth of Kevlar. So you just measure that up. Again, I think I've probably got enough here to wrap around, just to save some. Hopefully that's enough. So what you want to do is you want to get your tip, and you want to put the Kevlar halfway over the tip like that, and then you take your little bit of foam, attach the foam, stick that onto the Kevlar like that, so it's like a little flag. Alright, and then once you've done that, this is the tricky bit, make sure your hands are clean and you haven't got any glue on them, because the Kevlar will stick to the glue on your hands. So by all means use gloves if you've got them at this point. I did have some disposable gloves which were great, but seem to have run out. Been making a lot of stuff recently because of the fact that the events aren't on at the minute. So yeah, I've been making a lot of stuff, so I've actually run out of disposable gloves. Right, so, and the key here is to roll this as tight as you can. You don't want the tip loose, so it's really important you get it as tight as you can. There we go. That's one end. So again, let's just trim that bit off. So again, a little bit like a flag, about halfway long, like that. Stick your tip on so that it's in contact with the end, like so. Just clearing some of this glue off my fingers, because like I said before, it'll stick to my fingers and not the core if I'm not careful. There we go. Right, okay, and then same again, you just want to roll it nice and tight. There we go. That's that. So it's going to take a little bit of time to dry. It's going to take a little bit of time to dry. So basically, what you want to do now is just put your core aside. I'll trim these ends off a little bit later on. They won't be quite that long. So you want to leave that to dry, and we can now start looking at cutting foam for this sword. So what I'm actually building, so I don't think I've explained that. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm building myself a monstering weapon. So I play a character in Navarre, but this is actually going to be an orc sword. So when I fight as a barbarian orc, I tend to fight with two weapons, and that's basically because my character doesn't. So I just get to do a different fighting style. So I've been using my character's own swords for, well, since I started basically. So I want to get something a little bit more barbarian looking. Right, so foam next. Right, I'll just pause for a sec while I go and get some foam. Okie dokie. Right, so I think this is dried just enough now for us to actually glue this. So make sure, just pull apart the two sides and get the tip right to the end of the foam, and then lay it down flat, because you want this on a flat surface, and then very carefully just bring together the two edges, keeping it flat all the way. Now obviously this is a sort of jaggedy sword. If you were doing a nice straight sword, these would just be straight edges. And you want to leave a good 2 inches or so of foam at the tip. So what we've actually got here is about 2 inches there, but there's also another sort of half an inch of foam attached to the core as well. So just give that a bit of a squeeze, and again we're just going to give that a minute to dry up before we move it. So yeah, I sort of change my mind about this sort of thing all the time, but I generally do the centre. Obviously this is going to be the centre of the sword. So I do the centre first, and then I use that as a template to mark out the top and the bottom. You can measure it, which is fine, and might save you a little bit of foam as well if you do that. But as this is like asymmetrical, it's going to be a little bit harder to do. So I'm just going to literally, once this is dry, draw around this on the or foam to make the two sides. It's just slightly easier. Right, there we go. So that is glued in. Just turn it around, give it a squeeze on the other side. Make sure that we've got no areas where it is not attached. I mean, once this has been sandwiched together, you haven't got any opportunity to make sure that that these are glued together. So now's the time to do that. I mean, this glue is pretty strong stuff. Once it's on, it shouldn't come apart. So I'm going to cut the other two sides, and then we'll sort of start sandwiching it all together then. I'll probably pause while I do that. You don't want to see me cutting that farm, I'm sure. Okay, so I've now cut out two rough shapes. So I'm going to now start to glue these up. So over the tip here, you can add a little bit of reinforcement if you want to. I think I'm probably going to do that. I'm going to use when I find it. So I'm just going to use a little bit of cloth to add a little bit more reinforcement to that tip. Belts and braces and all that malarkey. Again, this doesn't have to be too accurate. All it means is that you've just got that little bit of added protection. It just stops the tip from poking through, and that's what you want. You don't, you know, safety wise, you want to do everything you can to make your weapon safe. That's just sort of number one priority, really. So, a little bit of glue. There's my spreader gone. Never find the damn thing when I want it. Typical. Oh, there it is. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Oh, there it is. I'm terrible at putting things down. I'm not able to find the damn things after I've well, hopefully you can see that. Hopefully that's in the right place. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue across the tip, and then I'm going to put a little bit of cloth. I'm not going to glue the cloth. Oh, yeah, I'm going to glue the cloth. I wasn't going to glue the cloth. The cloth's really thin, so it doesn't really need a lot of gluing. Cloth, and that just covers the tip. And then the same on the other side. Some people don't bother doing this, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. I tend to sometimes I'll actually use Kevlar as well. If it's probably a bigger sword, I would probably use Kevlar to cover that bit of there's not too much glue there, isn't there? Cover that bit of the tip, just because it's a heavier weapon. I mean, this isn't. It's a single hander. It's not that heavy. so I don't really need to use Kevlar for that. Right, so we're going to sandwich this together now. So I'm going to spread glue on both surfaces. And we are going to make a sandwich. Again, just make a nice thin, even coat all the way along. Just make sure you get it right to the edges. And then on the other side. Okay, we just need to leave those two bits to dry before we sandwich them together. Or you can take the shortcut and run them over with a hairdryer. Speeds things up slightly. And then you just need to sandwich it together. Give it a good press down. We're going to do the other side. So where you've got an asymmetrical build, just be careful that you're gluing the right side. I've done that before where I've glued the wrong side, so make sure you sort of fit. And then I've done that before when I've glued, it's like, oh god, no, and you end up having to cut another piece or something. It's just like wasting foam, wasting time. I do apologise if I go out of shot at any time, because this overhead camera malarkey is something I'm just trying today. So please forgive me if I go out of shot or my big baldy head appears in shot when it shouldn't. So I do apologise for that. So yeah, same again. Glue it up. Make sure everything's nice and firm. Make sure you've got the right side. Glue up the other side. Yeah, just in case you didn't already know, the foam I'm using is LD45, which is pretty much the standard for making LARP weapons. And this is a LARP weapon. It's not a cosplay weapon. This should be LARP safe. There's a difference between doing cosplay and LARP. The main difference is that generally with cosplay, you never actually hit anybody with it. So the foam can be a different type of foam. It can be denser, which makes it easier to work with. You don't have to put all the reinforcing in. You don't need to worry about tips poking through, because you're never going to hit anybody with it, so it doesn't matter. Whereas with a LARP one, a LARP safe weapon, you are always thinking about safety. That is your number one That's your number one priority when making a weapon, is the safety of the people you're going to be hitting with it. So, you know, the density of the foam is important. The construction is important, making sure that nothing comes loose inside. You know, that's all really important considerations, which you don't have to worry about with cosplay, I guess. It does give you a few. I'm just rambling while the glue's drying. It does give you a few restrictions. I mean, there are some things that you just can't do with a LARP weapon that you could do with cosplay. You know, putting hard molded pieces in. Any molded pieces you use have got to be soft. So it's always something you have to consider. Whereas with pretty much with a cosplay weapon, anything goes really. I know some conventions don't let you have weapons in the convention. So, you know, that's a consideration, I guess. But if you're going to make a weapon for cosplay, you know, it doesn't need to be. You don't need to go to all this business. But for LARP, you certainly do. Okay, let's give it a bit of a. Right, and let's sandwich this up. I think probably what I will do is with this build is, I'll probably do it in a couple of parts. It's a sort of rambling nonsense conversation build. You know, just me rambling to myself, and I guess you guys, if you can put up with it. So probably what I'll do is I'll get the basic construction done, and then I'll probably wait until another day, and I'll do like the latex in the spraying and all that stuff on another day. I'll see how I feel. This is something for, I guess, if you're absolutely bored stiff at home and you're in lockdown or isolation or whatever. It's just something you can stick on in the background and vaguely ignore. Okay, so what we've got now is your basic shape. So it's all sandwiched together. I mean, what we need to do next is sort of trim up the edges. And of course, this isn't going to be, you know, the glue does need to really set. So you sort of need to leave it 24 hours before you start. This camera's annoyingly in the way. Before you start latexing, painting and all that stuff. So what I was thinking of doing with this actually is using the sort of minimum tools that I could possibly use making this, so that if you're someone who it might be doing a weapon on your dining room table, you know, it might be something you can have a go at. And I think an Orc Blade sort of lends well to this sort of thing, because you can get away without having to use belt sanders and being really accurate with all your measurements. It's just going to be basically a big sort of iron chopper if you're 40k or fantasy Games Workshop players. A big chopper sort of thing. So I'm now going to probably change my blade out, or at least clip off the end. And I'm going to trim up the edge a bit. So just be careful when you're doing this. These knives are very sharp. I've already cut myself once today. So I'm not looking for a straight edge here. I'm just evening up the foam. I'm not looking for a straight edge. This is going to be oops, I have to sort something out with that, I think. This is just going to be really rough. It literally, the person who made this wasn't in a hurry. He just wanted something big and heavy to attach to a stick and bash Imperials with. So he's certainly not. Maybe it's something that they smelted in the field. Don't know. Doesn't matter really. But we're not going for. We're going for crude. That's what we're going for. So far, the materials I've used for this, like I said before, is LD45 foam. It's a fiberglass, 8mm fiberglass core. The centerpiece of foam is 8mm. However, the two on the top are 5mm. So you don't really need any thicker than that because they're not striking surfaces. But I will be putting some detail on the surface, which will thicken it up very slightly. So all I'm doing now is just evening up the foam so that when it comes to cutting and shaping it, it's all at the same level. And again, you don't need to worry too much because, as I say, it's meant to be a rough blade. You don't need to worry too much about the way it's looking. Let's just even this up here. So I think the end, I haven't even decided, you know, the exact what I'm actually going to do with it. I'm literally making this on the fly as I go. So yeah, I'm probably just going to get a Sharpie and have a play with this end. So I've been sort of toying with the idea of that sort of shape, but also that sort of weird, sort of something weird. So you just need to remember where your core is as well, which if you want to just make sure you're not cutting into sections the way your core is, just mark your core back up. Again, I have cut it into where the core's meant to be previously, and that's a real. I quite like this sort of shape at the end. Quite like that actually. What do you think? Something like that. I quite like that. I mean, yeah, quite like that. It's a sort of reverse, the reverse of like the Orc blades in Lord of the Rings sort of thing. So a bit of a point down there, and then this bit is just sort of jagged metal that comes all the way along there. So yeah, I quite like that. So it's a vague sort of. What do you reckon? Come down there. You come down there slightly like that. I've got a bit of a cut there, so I'm going to have to take that off. Made a bit of a mistake. But that's well within. That should be. Oh, there's my ruler. That should be well within the 10mm. Yeah, that's 20mm there. That's absolutely fine. So I can. Let me just take that off. Yeah. Right, I think I quite like that sort of shape. So. I do want to bring the angle in, there like that. Okay, I'm just going to pause it there for a sec. I'll be back in a minute. Right then, back again. Right, yeah. So I quite like that sort of hook end, and again, I don't want this straight. I deliberately don't want that edge straight. I don't want any edge straight with this. So I'm just going to cut this now. So what about there? Again, I am not worrying too much about measuring this or anything like that. I do actually want it to come up there slightly. That's fine. As well, take the top of this bit off. The problem with having a freezer in my shed is that people keep coming in to get things out of it. Where was I? Right, okay. So yeah, I've got a sort of hookey end there. I probably want to make it slightly, very slightly shorter, I think. Looks like a new blade. Yeah, so it's a little bit, it's a little long. There we go. There a little bit more. I think that'll do. It's got quite a long. Quite a long tip on it actually. Yeah, not too happy with that. Right. The problem with having the core too far back from the end is it means you get a lot of play in the end, which can then, as the glue gets old, weaken the glue joint. However, because of this spike, I can't really cut much more off if I want to have that spike, which I really do. So I might just have to live with that being a little bit long, which is a shame. I mean, it's soundly glued. It's not gonna hurt in the short term, but it might mean that long term this might not last as long as some other blades. Yeah. I'm just going to cut this thing as well here. Right. So the next thing I'm going to do is sort of shape the edges. And again, I want this to be nice and crude. So I'm going to be sort of scalloping the blade along, making it look like it's been roughly filed. Yeah, so there we go. And again, this is just going to be just by eye. So what I do want to do is I want to try and get some sort of close to the sort of centre, and I'm deliberately making this all rough. I don't want this to be you know, smooth or anything like that. It's literally big chunks taken out of the metal. Same on the top. it to appear like it's been really, really roughly made, but it has been really roughly made. I made it really rough. So, yeah. It's just taking big chunks out of it to make it look like and I'm deliberately sawing as well, so I'm deliberately sawing like this, which gives it that sort of that look. I mean, if you were doing a I'll just show you slightly on this side, I guess. If you were doing a ordinary sword, you would want to avoid sawing, so you would want to cut into your foam and then just drag your knife along like that. Can you see that? Hopefully you can see that. And drag your knife along, because then what happens there is you get a nice smooth line. But for this one, I don't actually want that. I want it to be really rough. So I'm just cut through that area there. What you want to do though is you do want to try and work this edge so that it's reasonably fine. So once I've got this sort of rough shape cut out, I will go back and redo the edge. Also, while you're doing this, just remember where your core is, and just reference where your core is, because you don't want to be cutting too close to the core. That would be an absolute disaster. It would basically, at that point, ruin the weapon. Stupid head. There we go. Let's cut that. Also, just be careful if you're cutting towards yourself. Be careful you don't slip. Just take your time. Even when you're cutting rough like this, just take your time, because these blades are incredibly sharp. You don't want to end up slicing your fingers off. Okay, so that's the top. That's probably fine for the top, I think. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is just flip it over so you've got the blade side. And we're now just going to carve the actual edge of the blade so that it has actually got an edge to it. Again, we just need to be roughly doing this. We're going to give all this a sand afterwards, so it's not quite as rough as this. But yeah, you do want to try and get the edge reasonably edge-like. So there's some sort of, so it looks like someone has attempted to sharpen it. So you just want to take off any sort of big lumps where your carving on the two sides hasn't quite matched up. A little bit there. You'll also note that these blades they get blunt really quickly. So you do have to keep changing your blades at fairly regular intervals. I got these off Amazon. 50 snap-off blades. It wasn't much more than a £5. Pretty much a bargain, like. So yeah, cheaper than certainly going to somewhere like Wickes, which is my local. There are other builders merchants available. They just happen to be the one that's closest to me. And you know, I get a lot of stuff from there. Just Let's just tidy up this workspace a bit. It's getting a bit cluttered. Yeah, so I would recommend trying to keep your workspace reasonably clear if you can, especially if you're working inside. My wife was always going mad when I first started, because I was doing this stuff inside the house. She went ballistic. So I've got to try and keep my workspace as clear as I can. Doesn't always work. Usually when I'm really enthusiastic about something, then it's just foam everywhere. So right, I'm fairly happy with that shape. I think I need to do a little bit more there. Yeah, generally fairly happy with that. I don't think there's much more I want to do. No, not too bad. I mean, you just keep going until you're happy with something like this. As I say, there's no plan to it. We're just, you know, the idea is that this is rough. In fact, the rougher the better. Right, I'm going to give it a little bit of a sand, and as I said before, I want to try and do this without using too many. I want to do this without using too many power tools that you might not have. Really, just to show you what you can do with next to nothing, really. I mean, I started out doing these videos mainly because I couldn't find any that were you know, suitable in the UK. Well, suitable for UK weapons, etc. There are a couple out there now, which is fab. But yeah, the reason I started doing these was there was nothing out there. So as I learned stuff, I sort of videoed it. So some of my early videos, I would say my techniques have changed, and I would say that perhaps I'm slightly better now than I was. Not much, slightly. So basically, I don't want this to be smooth. What I do want is to just try and even everything up. Oop. I keep forgetting about making sure everything's in the camera view. But, yeah. So yeah, all I'm doing is just making sure everything's evened up. And then what we'll do, just make sure that, yeah, it's all good. Yeah, no problems there so far. Right, okay, so what have we got left to do on this now, really? Got the handle and the pommel to do. I've left quite a long handle. I don't know whether I'm going to put a cross guard. What do you reckon? Should I do a cross guard? Yeah, I think I'm going to do some sort of cross guard, something maybe more akin to a knife rather than a sword. I'm literally doing this, making this up as I go along. Yeah. Right, so probably what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a cross guard. I'm going to just see if I can find some scrappy bits of foam that I've used for other projects to make that out of. I don't really want to cut in to a great big bit of foam if I can absolutely help it. Oh, there we go. Sweet. Oh yeah, this is a nice bit of 15mm foam off a shield project that I did some time ago. So, crossguard. What do you reckon? Maybe something that sweeps back to give the hand a bit of protection. What do you reckon? I think sort of short at this top, so we're not too worried about you know, catching blades. This is not a blade catcher. This is just a, you know, something to just absolutely pound your enemies with. So, but maybe you want a bit of protection across here. I don't know. And again, I don't want this too thick. Maybe. I don't know. So maybe. Something like a vicious hook. Maybe. I wonder if it's going to be thick enough. It probably will be. So what was that? 8, 10, 18. So that's 18 and that's 15. So this is going to actually be slightly narrower. If I put 2 together, that's going to be 30. Yeah. Cut 2 of those. Yeah, quite like that. What do you think? Yeah? Do you want to go just square there? Something like that. Yeah? I can actually just follow that line there, really. So if I cut 2 of those out of this bit, yeah, let's do that. So I want a core. Core's going to go through there somewhere. Right. And again, straight edges for this build. We're not worried about straight edges here. We're just going to cut this out. And this is literally a bit of scrap foam, so I'm not worried too much about saving this. What I could do is tilting this camera up slightly, because I'm sort of having to be much further away from my body than I normally like. Oh well, it's all a learning curve, isn't it? Ba-ba-da-ba. So I'm just going to cut another one of that, another one of those straight out of this bit of foam. What's the best way? I mean, I don't want to waste foam deliberately. I don't want to deliberately waste foam, but this is a bit of scrap, so it's not like. I would like to try and keep the big bit there, if at all possible. I've done that a bit too tight, I've done that a bit bigger. So, as long as it's sort of roughly the right shape. Okay, we'll get a bit wider. You know, this might not work. I might stick it on and it just looks awful. So be prepared for that. Sometimes I sort of know in my head exactly what it is that I want to build. Sometimes I don't. This is sort of half and half, I guess. I knew I wanted to make a sort of rough looking Orc Blade, but until I started making it, I had absolutely no idea what the shape was going to be. Not a clue. I guess that's sort of my sort of style. I'm not one of these people who can spend hours and hours and hours designing something and then making that vision come off the page and sort of live I'm that way. Yeah, I think so. I like to be sort of more spontaneous. Saying that, I've done a lot of custom work for people that is exactly that. I've actually got an example here. So I'm currently building this for someone. I don't know if you can see that. So this is going to be a LARP safe replica of Azog the Defiler's mace from The Hobbit. So I had to use a lot of reference material and to get this one actually right. I think I've done an okay job. There are some compromises because this isn't for cosplay. This is actually a LARP weapon. I've had to reinforce areas. I've had to compromise on some of the more sort of the aesthetic looking parts. For example, in the original, this wrap sort of thins here, but it continues to go around. But actually, it's not a great feel when you're actually trying to hold this to whack someone with. I've also slightly adjusted the proportions and made these fins just a little bit smaller than on the original, because obviously the original was like it was a movie prop, and it was, I don't even know if it was a real thing. I think it might have just been CGI. I don't know. But you know, this is basically like a great big windbreak, and you start, you know, swinging this about, and even with these ones which are slightly smaller than the in proportion to the handle than the original, it's still quite hefty to try and swing. And then the other compromise is I've had to leather reinforce each of the spines. You won't really see that once all the latex is on it, but you certainly won't see it once I've got all the paint effects on it. But that's another compromise, because if I didn't have that, basically the first couple of times you hit someone, these spines would just come off. So yeah, so that's like one of the opposite things that I'm sort of, you know, got to do. I'm also building. Oh yeah, I got one of these. This is another thing that's happening. Again, this was for someone else. It's basically just a big kitty club. I really like this. This is actually the second one I've made. He doesn't know it yet, but I've already finished one. But I was using a different style of foam, and it came out a little bit hard. It will probably pass weapons check, but I don't know. So I've made another one, and this is using a softer foam. So this is LD45 here, but this is actually LD33, which is a softer foam. It just means that this end has got a lot more cushioning and give on it. I'm a lot happier with this one, so I'm going to make this one up, and you can probably have them both, because you know I'm not going to use the other one. Someone in our group will use it undoubtedly, but yeah, just redoing that. So they're the other bits and bobs. Right, back to this thing. What was I going on about? I don't know. This is one of these rambling videos, so you know, it's just me going on and on and on. Right, so that's the side we want, and then we're going to be having like what do I want? Do I do that like that? Was that how I was doing it? Yeah. What do you reckon? So like, yeah. Right, so I'm just going to mark up where the core is going to go through the two pieces, because I'm going to have to cut a little bit of a V there. There we go. And on that side. It's just so I can poke the core through. Reasonably easy. So, just check it all. Yep. Right, let's glue these two bad boys together. Carefully, don't get too much glue. Make sure you glue the right side, Rob. Again, I've done that many times. I've glued the wrong sides together. So we just need to dry those off. Hairdryer. You can see how light this is actually LD33 as well. You can see how light this foam is. The hairdryer just blows it off the table. Yeah, I mean, the colour doesn't make any difference. You can have black or white, it really doesn't make any difference. It's just that this white happens to be the lower density foam. I tend to use that from shields because it's lighter. And when you've got a shield that's got a decent thickness of foam on it, yeah, it can be really heavy. Right, let's glue up the end of this. Have I made sure that that's... no, do you know what? Well spotted, guys. I hadn't actually made this flush. So that would have been a bit of a disaster there, waiting to happen. There we go. Right, bit of glue. So you want to make sure you get this glue all the way around the core, and then all the way around the end of that foam. You want this to be a nice tight seal. And then don't forget to get your glue on the side, which I almost forgot. Get your glue on that side. So while I'm doing this, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that some of my friends do. So you may or may not know that a couple of my friends do a fantastic podcast. They are called the Larp Noobs Podcast. If I was any tech savvy, I'd put a link in the thing at the bottom, but I'm rubbish, so I probably won't. Just look them up. They're on YouTube, and you can listen to the podcast on Podbean as well. But recently, what they've been doing is some really great crafting live streams on Twitch, and then they tend to upload those onto YouTube after they've done them. I absolutely love them. They are actually really funny, as well as doing the actual crafting, which is great. I actually watch them just to listen to those two just banter between each other. Like Dave is Ian's like the straight man, and Dave's the funny one, I think. But Dave ends up just laughing his socks off at the stuff that Ian does, who's really a very, very talented crafter. But I would highly recommend you go and watch those. They're brilliant. You know, and if you can, follow them along when they're actually doing their live stream. It's great. I'm not tech savvy enough to do my own live stream, so you get this rubbishy, rambly video instead. So just have to put up with it. Right, okay, now let's just make sure I'm going to get this on the... Did I put the glue on it? Yeah, I did. So let's just make sure I'm going to get this on the right side. Yup. And then... it would probably been better if I'd have wrapped the handle first before I put this on, but oh well, stuff it. Ooh, quite like that. I'm going to chop all this in a minute, make it more like the blade as well. Yeah, it's coming along. There we are. Right. Okie dokie. Right, I'm just going to pause that for a sec. And I'll still got something to do. I'll be back in a bit.